Okay, everybody, welcome to, I think, what is the final event of the Rising Leaders Forum at this event. This is the panel discussion. We have a lot of great young people in the audience. We have a panel of young people, and this is about expectations and reality of your career. So we're going to answer some questions. I'm going to introduce our speakers, ask them some questions I have prepared. We really want it to be a dialogue. This is a really great chance to ask them for their experiences and things you're curious about, and then if we have time at the end, we will probably call it before 2 o'clock, and then we can mingle and talk to each other. I really encourage you to try to meet one new person before you walk out of the door there. I know, especially students I've seen clumped in your groups based on who you came here with. It's at conferences, you're really missing out if you're not trying to at least meet one new person every day. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm Kate Stambaugh. I work at the Applied Physics Lab. I've been there about 4.5 years. I've gotten involved with AIAA locally in the Mid-Atlantic section and nationally at convention conferences like this, trying to improve the young professional programming. So first we have Cheryl Blomberg, who is, actually maybe I should just let you guys introduce yourself. I'll do the very short one and they can provide the details. So Cheryl has earned her BS in chemical engineering at the University of Arizona. She's working currently on her master's in aerospace engineering with a focus in fluid dynamics and propulsion at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And she is the current AIAA student liaison to the board of directors. By the way, also afterwards, if you have any questions about AIAA and how it works and how you can fit and get involved, either as a young professional or a student, all of these people are great people to talk to. You also see AIAA staff in the audience. And so sorry, back to Cheryl. She's interned in the fields of cancer research, gas and oil, nuclear rockets, aerosol research, and plasma research, so kind of all across the board. She also plays semi-professional soccer, and earlier she was an under-21 professional soccer career, and then I think it broke her body, so now she's back to semi-professional soccer, which is still pretty big. Next we have Ryan. Ryan Rudy has a BS degree in aeronautical engineering from Penn State, and he's nearing completion of his Master's of Science in Systems Engineering, also from Penn State.
Sort of,
I was going to say, that's the official bio. I think he's not so nearing it, maybe done with it. He is a flight test engineer. Flight test engineer on you have a lot of airplanes, and I'm a space person, so he's worked on a whole lot of different airplanes. And if you're interested in the list, 787-8, 787-9, and the list goes on. He's currently assigned as a test conductor on the first flight test aircraft that will be primarily focused on flutter testing. You're Boeing. He's a Boeing. I forgot to mention the most important. Boeing. He was the project lead and technical expert for gauntlet testing, and let's see, I'm skipping over some of the airplane details, sorry. If you like planes, talk to Ryan. Ryan spent 1 year as a systems engineer performing requirements management on the 787-8. He started his career as a systems safety engineer on the RAH-66 Comanche and V-22 Osprey program during its return to flight program. So Ryan is also a member of the AIAA Young Professional Committee, and he was appointed as the YP, or Young Professional Liaison, to the AIAA's Board of Directors. Next we have Ben Marciona, who graduated from the University of Michigan in April 2011 with a degree in aerospace engineering. He's working part-time on his master's in systems architecting and engineering from the University of Southern California. He has interned in systems engineering at Lockheed Martin in Marietta, Georgia, doing the C5M Super Galaxy. And he's also worked as a systems engineer on the F-35 Lightning II at Lockheed Martin in Fort Worth, Texas. He's also worked as an aircraft designer at the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works in Palmdale, and on a variety of hypersonic, unmanned, and fighter programs. And right now, he's currently doing Lockheed Martin's Engineering Leadership Development Program, which is letting him do rotational assignments, and he's currently a test conductor and flight test engineer for the F-35 Lightning II at Edwards Air Force Base. And he got involved with the AIAA at University of Michigan and was the president of the student branch for 3 years. And he is currently the chair of his local section, the AIAA Antelope Valley section. Greg Scott, our final panelist, graduated from Penn State University with a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering and a minor in Engineering Leadership Development. He got his dream job right out of school working for the United Space Alliance in Houston and designing nominal and abort launch trajectories for the space shuttle and working as a flight controller in NASA's Mission Control Center. And while he was in Houston, he pioneered the Master's Science in Space Architecture program at University of Houston and was in the first class to get that degree. So he had his dream job, and then he quit his job and sold everything he owned and moved to England to do a PhD sponsored by ESA in space robotics at the University of Surrey. And now he works as an aerospace engineer and space roboticist at the Naval Research Lab, which is just right up the road. And he works on programs related to on-orbit servicing, underwater robotics, and other technology programs. And he's been a member of AIAA since his time as a student at Penn State. He's currently the chair of the AIAA Space Automation and Robotics Technical Committee and the integration chair for the Space 2014 Forum and Exposition in San Diego later this year. So that is all about our panelists. If you have any questions about their background, I'm sorry, Ryan, for skipping over a lot of the airplanes.
We were just discussing that perhaps those official written bios were more meant for printed materials, not introductions.
So I guess, can you guys still hear me? Oh, now you can hear me. Okay, so the first question I'm going to lead off with is, what advice do you have for someone who knows they want to be in the aerospace industry, but doesn't know exactly what they want to do in the industry? And we can just go down the line the first time, and after that, we'll start with Greg.
Start. So advice for wanting to be in the aerospace industry, but not knowing exactly what within the industry to be or where you want to go. I guess my comments is it doesn't really matter. If you're passionate about the aerospace industry and maybe you've got some interest in something, it's worth giving a shot wherever you can find a job that intrigues you. I would argue don't take a job you're not excited about. But I would say that once you're in, you get an exposure to so many other areas, so many other things that you might realize that your dream job isn't your dream job anymore even, which actually was the case for me. For me, I ended up, I got my dream job right out of my undergraduate degree. I worked for a NASA contractor. I was in mission control. It was pretty amazing, actually. But like any other situation that you're in, things change and your interests change, and you see, at least in my case, I see the shiny object over there, and I get attracted to try something new and different, which is why it actually ended up leading me to literally quit the job that at the time I never thought I could be fired from and never thought would always be around. Sold everything I owned and moved to another country to get another degree in something completely different. So just because you lock yourself into your first job doesn't necessarily mean that that's where you're going to be for the rest of your life. You have a lot of opportunity for new things and a lot of opportunity for change.
Yeah, definitely recognize the length of your career over the long term. Your first job isn't the only job you're going to have. We'll probably touch on some of these tenets later in the panel. But if you do jump into something and it's not your dream job right away, it doesn't mean life is over and you're never going to do something cool again. It just means that your next step, you want to be looking towards that. So if you don't know what you want to do, I know a lot of aerospace engineers probably come in and know that they want to be in the aerospace industry, or if you're mechanical or EE or something. So for me, I know I always wanted to be. But if you don't know and you're trying to figure out maybe if you want to do even controls or propulsion or structures or design or whatever that is, so maybe you know you want to be in the industry but you don't know what part of it, the best thing you can do is just do your research. Talk to people here at the conferences, talk to your professors, network with people when they come on campus to career fairs and info sessions and tech talks and things like that, and ask them all of the different questions about what sorts of things each of those functions mean. And sometimes if you really have to do it, even though it could be a little bit tougher in the short term, you just got to go out and try it. See if you can land an internship at one of those areas, or maybe you accept the first job not knowing if it's exactly what you want to do. And from the company perspective, that's not ideal because then you might want to leave in a year or something like that. But if you really genuinely don't know what you want to do, sometimes you just got to get in it, like Greg said. And once you're into the industry, it's so much easier to start learning about it from within, I think, than as a student.
I'm going to steal Cheryl's. That's what I do. So I just kind of want to build off what both Greg and Ben have said. Get in the door. That's the most important part. I grew up in this industry. I thought I had a pretty good idea of what opportunities were out there. I started in a job I had no idea what it was. It turned out to be one of the best jobs and best learning experiences I ever had. Try multiple things. Volunteer while you're on your primary assignment. Look for those opportunities to learn about other teams. Help solve a problem that goes between two teams. While you're doing that, make sure that you get your primary job done. You can't slack off on that. And one last thing, there may be multiple dream jobs for you. I've had two.
I mean, clearly I'm coming from a slightly different place of all of them of, Katie just said, I have a chemical engineering degree as my main degree, and I'm working on another one, and my choice was I really wanted to be in aerospace, and so now I'm just pursuing more education in it, and, soon I'll graduate, and I'm pretty much at the point of jumping in positions. I interview for a position, I think I know exactly what it is, I get there, and it's something completely different. It just opens your eyes a bunch. You just have to try and see what happens, and then go from there.
So a lot of you have said, get your foot in the door. What advice would you give on getting your foot in the door with any job versus waiting around till a job that's a better fit? And do you find those same, is it better to go for a big company or a small company if you're really just trying to get a foot in the door? Go, you can just jump in, no order.
Don't take a job you don't think you can be at least remotely interested in, period. It's not the best time in the industry right now, especially in areas of defense and aerospace and NASA and everybody's budget cuts across the board. But I would argue that if you're not going to be excited about an opportunity that's presented to you, don't just take it because it's an opportunity. Keep working until you find something that you think you can be excited about. It doesn't have to be your dream job. I mean, don't expect that your first job out of an aerospace degree is to be an astronaut, because it's just not going to happen. But I know from experience. But if you at least wait until you find something that you're excited, even remotely excited about doing, because I guess like what Ryan was saying, you never know what you're going to get into until you get into it, and you might find out a job that seemed okay turns out to be a dream job.
And I definitely agree with all of Greg's comments. And the other thing I should point out as a disclaimer is everything that each of us says can probably be interpreted in a different way, or someone else could have had some different thing. So what you want to do is you want to take everything that we're saying throughout the whole panel and then kind of combine it and then put a filter on it based on what you want to do with your career, and then pick out the things that really apply to you. We've all had different experiences, and I'm sure that throughout the panel you'll find this. So whatever we're saying, take it and then sort of just listen to the parts that you think really you can apply to the path that you want to take. As far as accepting a job or waiting for a dream job, that one can be tough because it definitely depends, and that's why I threw out the disclaimer. If I told you to wait for your dream job and then you had a really solid offer but it wasn't your dream job and you didn't accept it, and then you are living in your mom's basement for like 10 years, you can't come blaming me. So if you have, when you look at jobs like this, if you're maybe in your last month of your last semester and you have a pretty good offer, I mean, you would probably want to take that. And I've mentioned that your careers are really long. They're all stepping stones. So if you get in at something that's a good offer, you'd probably want to do it. I totally agree that you don't want to accept something that you can't even get excited about a little bit. But definitely be open-minded about things that you might be able to learn stuff from. When you're looking for that dream job, again, you're going towards it, sort of following a big path to get there. And in almost no situation do you actually follow the path that you want to take. So if you say, here's my dream job, it's not typical for you to just go right into that job out of school. You usually have to bounce around to a couple different things, and you should be okay with that. That's the reality of how the job market works. And I think if you ask any senior executive of a major company, they didn't plan to be CEO or CTO or whatever, or VPs and chief engineers. They didn't expect their career path to turn out the way it did. They just worked really hard and they worked smart, and that's how they got there.
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo off of Greg's, because I've had 4 jobs, 2 were dream jobs. 1 was okay, but I quickly realized it sounded good when I took it. When I first started, it was pretty challenging, and then quickly died down, and it just wasn't worth it, and so I quickly got out. And then 1 job that was not a dream job, and it's not worth it when you don't look forward to getting up and going to work in the morning.
And then kind of on the aspect that most of them actually didn't touch in is also how to get your foot in the door. Being here, I saw a lot of these faces at the networking event last night. People are going to help you get your foot in the door. You know, I'm not going to lie, if you're applying for a job and you're in a sea of 1,000 resumes, that's kind of rough. But if you're a sea of 1,000 resumes, but you happen to talk to somebody who's like, oh yeah, I remember talking to that person, pull the resume aside, just even the fact that you've spoken to someone, it's going to help a lot. Just network at these events.
But on that note, you can't just expect that person you met at the conference is going to remember they met you and find your resume. You need to reach out to them in email and say, hey, we talked at the conference. I'm really interested in working at your company. I've actually already applied. Is there anything else I can do? Or could you put me in touch with somebody else so I can learn more about what it's like to work there? Because you have to tell them, I have already applied, or here's my resume, can you send it along to somebody who might be interested? Don't expect somebody that you just handed a business card to somewhere in the past 3 days to remember where your resume went in their giant system.
Make it personal. Make that connection personal.
And kind of along that, I actually got my job at the Naval Research Lab from someone I met at the AIAA Space 2010 conference, 11 conference, 12 conference, 10 conference. A few years back, one of these conferences. But the idea is kind of echoing what a couple of people have said, is that it's all about getting to know someone, many people here at the conference, because you never know what opportunities are going to come out if you follow up with them, if you're making that personal professional interaction and trying to build that network. And
we could probably talk about networking for an entire panel, panel discussion. But and if you have more questions about it later, by all means, ask in the Q&A part. And there's a study done by Forbes a couple years ago, and it found that 56% of employees got their job through a personal connection. But what's more interesting is the breakdown of those statistics, and like 10% was standard apply online, wait to be contacted, and the rest was a whole range of other things. So 56% got their jobs through a personal connection, and of that, 11% of those 56 had contacted that person often. They were in regular contact with them. 55% had contacted them on occasion, maybe every few months, twice a year. And then the remainder, about 28%, barely contacted them at all, maybe once a year. And the point is that it's your weak ties that make your network strong. You don't have to know some recruiter and all about them and be constantly talking to them to be able to get in with the company. Especially at conferences here where you're meeting a lot of different people, you can easily find some people that if you make a point and they remember you and you follow up with them, you can come back a few months later or later that year, and if they remember you and you've made a point to stay in touch even a little bit occasionally, that's what makes a strong network. And if you want some more details on networking, there's 2 books that I recommend to a lot of people that some people have probably read in here. One's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Classic one written in the 20s, but every single one of those principles applies today. That sort of talks about dealing with people and how to really be genuine and be a good listener. You will learn more from that book than anything else. And then Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. He's a networking guru. He was the chief marketing officer of Deloitte when he was 30. He knows everything there is to know about networking, and he can give you some really interesting tips in that book. Read those 2 if you're interested about networking.
Okay, so when you guys are, back when you were looking for a job or currently when you're looking for jobs, and you go to an interview, on one side you're selling yourself and trying to get them to buy off on you, but what do you look at when you're interviewing? Because interviews are a two-way street. So what are you looking for in companies? What should people look out for?
Well, I guess I'll start since I'm in the middle of that right now. Sorry, can you guys hear me? I see head nods, all right. So being that I'm in the middle of all that interviewing process right now, there's a lot of different things. I mean, clearly everybody's going to research the companies going in, but when you get there, you know, you can't just let them all ask all the questions. You need to ask things for yourself as well, you know, for example, one that a lot of people ask, and I know I ask, is, you know, what's my first week going to look like? What's a typical day? What's my first 6 months? You know, how long until I get to start doing things that I want? Because going in, you might be expecting, this is what I'll be doing every day, and you get there and you ask and you find out that's not at all true. You might think you're going to be out in the field all the time and you're actually sitting at a desk. You might think you're at a desk and you're actually out on the field. You know, you have to ask to be able to know what is really going on, because, you know, in online posting can only tell you so much. So that's one of the really big things, as well as just, you know, a lot of times, even after the interview or during the interview, asking about their experiences with the company, things they would change, saying, you know, what's the worst thing about your job? That's really telling of what people are gonna say. You know, a lot of people are saying, you know, during really busy weeks, like, you know, launch weeks, it's, you know, we work really long hours. But it's okay because that's also their most rewarding time. So things like that of asking, you know, not what's the best thing you do, which that's a great question to ask, but, you know, what's the worst thing you do? It tends to tell you a lot about the company as well and how different people in different areas are getting it. Also, you can get in contact really easily. You can ask them for, you know, other people who've recently been in your position, because usually you're not being hired by somebody who's 2-3 years out from where you want to be, and saying, you know, could you give me someone in contact with who, you know, recently had this position or something similar, or is somewhere where I see myself in 5 years, so I can say, how did you get there? How did you do it? You know, what was your experience? Those all really help.
And when you ask those questions, I think the best time to ask the ones, especially about seeing if you could find someone that's been in a similar job, that's after you get the offer, when you're trying to make the decision, I think. Don't ask those in the first interviews, because then you're a little bit too forward. You didn't get the job yet. Just hold on, hold your horses. But once you get an offer, by all means, make sure you know exactly what that job is about before you accept it, because there's a lot of times that it does change, and a lot of times the managers may not even know. So it would be a really good idea to go and talk to someone that's actually doing it. And once you have an offer, at that point, the company, they want you, they bought into your brand, so they have all the incentive to put you in touch with maybe a younger engineer that recently graduated, and then they can talk about their expectations and the reality of their own job. So definitely do that.
Yeah, so I'm really big on who are the people I'm going to be working with? What's the team like? What's the team's culture? That can make or break how fun the job is, even if the actual technical tasks are exactly what you think you want to do. Another question that's kind of illuminating is ask them what they expect you to do, what role, what tasks. How much definition they give you on that will tell you a lot about the manager and the team. The more detailed, the more thought they've put into it. Kind of like Cheryl, ask what's a normal week look like? How much overtime should I be expecting? Is it frequent? Is it infrequent? How much will I have to travel? Another good one is, if you're involved in AIAA, ask what their level of support for involvement in associations like this one are. Ask those questions up front.
And I'll kind of on that note give two kind of general pieces of advice. I would say if you do get an offer for an opportunity for an interview, never turn down an opportunity for an interview. Even if it's a job you don't think you're all that excited about, don't turn down the opportunity, because just because you're going to an interview doesn't mean you're going to take the job. What it's going to do is it's going to open up your eyes. Maybe it's going to turn out that the job you thought was going to be horrible is an awesome job or a great opportunity. I made that mistake myself and turned down an offer for an interview from an organization that seemed a little sketchy. They wouldn't tell me what the name of the company was. They wouldn't tell me who the founders and the investors in the company were. They wouldn't give me any information about what it was all about. And I have a job, and I'm comfortable in my job. So I decided it wasn't worth my time. And I later found out it was one of the now fairly large startups in the aerospace industry that at the time was nobody. So you never know who you're going to have an opportunity to interview with. Even if you're excited about what you do, even if you're excited about what this new opportunity may have to offer, just because you go to the interview doesn't mean you have to take the job. But if you are lucky enough to get an offer, don't forget you are then in your strongest negotiating position anywhere, at any time in the process. If they've made the decision that they want you, you kind of control the power. So now you have the opportunity to negotiate for roles and responsibilities, salary, vacation time, any other aspect of the job, opportunities for travel, working into your contract that you want to go to conferences. All of these types of things are things you can negotiate once you get an offer. And even after you negotiate for days, weeks, months, however long it may take, you still don't have to take the job. You have all the power.
I should point out that the negotiation doesn't apply when you're first out of school. Your first job is you...
I completely disagree.
So maybe it depends on the big companies. If you work at a Boeing, a Northrop, a Lockheed, a Raytheon, they have extremely strict policies that even, the vice presidents of HR can't change. So, for example, your salary negotiating power, maybe you can negotiate a starting bonus of plus or minus 500. Beyond that, I would say negotiating your salary, if you were lucky, you could increase it by like $1,000, and you'd have to have a really strong case. And it can't be that you're moving to LA and LA is expensive, because they don't pay you based on cost of living. They pay you based on representative salaries of the area. It's their fancy way of getting around that kind of stuff. So when you're first out of school, you can't negotiate the number of vacation days you have as a brand new grad at a big company. 15 days at Lockheed, that's what it is. You don't get that. When you're more senior, by all means. But do you have a different perspective on other companies?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the type of organization you're with. I mean, I understand every company has their policies, and the larger the companies that can pool the bigger numbers of hires, they don't have to be flexible in those policies, because if you don't take the job, they're going to find somebody else.
Right.
Like, at the end of the day, that's how they operate. They're hiring thousands of people every year, assuming the economy's half decent. But some big companies don't work that way. Maybe you're working into a specific department where they require a specific skill set in a certain programming language, and a certain software package, and a certain whatever that you as a newbie may have, that not the average everyday person does. I had an internship with analytical graphics and became a master at Satellite Toolkit. So going into my first job in flight design and dynamics for the space shuttle program, that was very attractive for them. So even though at the time USA was a huge Boeing Lockheed hybrid independent organization, they had their strict rules. But because I had a skill set that they were looking for, I was still able to do some negotiation. Would I have been able to do that at Boeing or Lockheed? Maybe not. I don't know. But it also doesn't hurt to ask.
So kind of looking a little further down the line, one tidbit that I'd like to share is, okay, you've got a couple years in industry or whatever your first job is, you're making what's called a lateral move within the same organization to a different job. They will tell you that there is no salary negotiation. There is. You can, and I wish I had known this before taking my last job, but you can ask for a little bit there. There is some negotiating room there. It is not just a take it or leave it.
All right, we're getting good conflicting opinions on the panel. That's always fun. Okay, so expectations and reality of your career. Everyone started somewhere, so if you remember that excitement you had when you started and then where you are today, what's one of the biggest letdowns or kind of negative surprises that you've had? I don't want to be a Debbie Downer for everyone, but there are, I mean, what's one of those big just wake up realities of, oh yeah, this is something I have to deal with in my career?
At least at the start, you were a small cog in a very big wheel. And this goes for, I'd come from a Lockheed background, so I haven't worked at small companies, so don't think of it from that perspective if you're looking for something small or a startup. This is for the standard big companies. If you went to a Lockheed and a Boeing and a Northrop and you changed jobs and you were designers or whatever at each one, you probably would not notice the difference between them except for the logos on the wall. The organizations are very similar. Sure, there's intricacies of each one, but for the most part, I think they're very similar. There's large corporations. So when you're first starting out of school, especially, it's kind of like the circle of life. You go through middle school, and then you're the cool kid in 8th grade, and then you're the freshman. And then you go up, you're a senior, you're like rule of school, and then you're a freshman in college. Nobody cares about you. Then you're senior in college, you think you're, stupendous, internships and all this other stuff, and then you start your career, and you got 45 years to build up to the next, pinnacle of it. Not trying to be Debbie Downer. But so there's a lot of things that you can do in your career that are really exciting, but my point is recognize that you have to still work within the limits of the corporation, and you just have to figure out a way to get around some of those typical limitations. A lot of times, like coming to conferences, right? Your manager tells you, nope, you can't go, don't have the money. Well, have a serious conversation with them. See if you can kind of maybe go around, or if you could talk to someone else that might have money. Oftentimes, the senior leaders have money and are able to support that kind of thing. So when you get into your first job, I think the biggest realization was just what a giant corporation it is. I mean, there's people that work 30 years at one site, and Lockheed has a couple hundred sites, and at each of those sites, people just work their entire career there. You have to really realize how broad some of those big companies can be, and kind of work your way within that construct. Don't ever get frustrated with policies and things like that. Just say, all right, these are kind of a fact of life. Now, how do I problem solve around? And once you can figure that out, you can end up being really, really happy and successful in a big corporation, because those big corporations have tons of resources and tons of opportunities. So as long as you find a way to take advantage of them within the constructs of the way that corporate policies work, you can have a lot of fun.
Yeah, and just to build off what Ben was saying, kind of building on the school analogy, that applies so I come from a big company background, obviously. I have moved between 4 different company sites now, and every time you're starting your network over from scratch. Yeah. And that can be tough, especially the longer you spend in any one site.
And that goes back to the weak ties thing that I mentioned before. Yes, you start over, but especially depending on your career horizons, if you want to be chief engineers or VPs and stuff, even though it's a real big challenge to go and move sites and start back at the bottom, if you don't want to be, if you don't want to be doing this one specific job for your whole life and maybe a technical fellow in that area and you want to work at that one site all the time, great, you can stay where you are. But if you want to move up, go take that challenge and develop that new network, because the more places you go, the more people that know you in some respect, and down the road, all of those weak ties are going to be what make you effective as a vice president or general manager or chief engineer, something like that.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like starting over is a negative thing. You will definitely learn a lot at each site you're at, because every one of them does something different even when they're in the same company. The one thing you will get caught up a bit in that is that the sites don't always necessarily like or agree with each other, so sometimes you get caught in the politics between the sites.
And everyone can read, they're talking Lockheed speak, but you can read this into anything you do, any new project you move on to, a new professor you work with. It applies in academia, government, and the private sector. All right, why don't we open up to some questions that you guys have? I have a whole list. I can keep going if you don't have any, but I bet there are some questions out there. Yes, go ahead.
So I was talking about yesterday in a second. You should, after your first job, even if it's not what you like, stay with it for a couple of years so that they see this is what you're doing and you're dedicated. Is there an upper end of that? Like, don't stay with them for too long, or you'll get stuck?
So the question, if anyone couldn't hear it, was there's a suggestion to, even if you don't really like a job, stay with it for about at least 2 years. And he's asking, is there an upper end where you're really staying too long and should start to move on? Is that your question?
I'd say probably 2 to 5 years is, unless it's something you absolutely know, this is what I want to spend the rest of my life doing, this and only this. I wouldn't say more than 5, says the guy who's now like 10 years in flight test experience.
And the answer definitely depends on your career horizons and where you do want to go. If you want to be a tech fellow, by all means, stay in that discipline, maybe go to complementary disciplines. If you want to be a structural design fellow, maybe do some structural analysis and some manufacturing and then go back into structural design. But if you want to go beyond just that kind of thing, I agree. I think 2 to 5, 8 is probably the tops that you'd want to do before you'd want to move on to something new. Whether that something new is structural design versus structural analysis, those are a little bit complementary, but just kind of slowly broaden out. I'm not saying you need to go from structural design and 5 years later you have to go to BD or business development, and then 5 years later go into HR. It doesn't need to be that broad, but just put yourself in a new situation, a new challenge, whether that's moving between sites or changing groups or changing programs, some area that you're growing, because as soon as, after about 5 years, that's kind of the amount of time that it takes to become an expert in whatever given area you're in, an expert on that program, an expert in design of some sort. And then you want to move to somewhere that you can continue growing, because you never want your growth potential to be stagnant.
Yeah, the longer you stay in one particular role or function, the harder it's going to be to change.
I'll go to the other end of the extreme. If you're not happy, move. Doesn't matter how short of a time you're there. If you're changing jobs every 4 months, you're going to start struggling to find opportunities because nobody's going to take you seriously. But if you're in a situation where you're not happy, move on. Doesn't matter how long it's been.
Definitely.
Yeah, I left my second job after 6 months, so I would wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
And all right, so I just preached about how you should stay at a job for at least 2 years. My first job out of school was in F-35 systems engineering in Fort Worth, Texas. And my dream job was aircraft design at the Skunk Works in Palmdale. And when Lockheed made me an offer because I was a past intern my senior year in like February or something, you either accept the offer or you decline it and you hope that you'll get something before you graduate. You don't get to go back to it because they've already filled the position. And when Fort Worth made the offer, at the time, that particular year was a really tough year for 2011. So I graduated April 2011. And that year was a much tougher year for the Skunk Works. They kind of the 2008 stuff was impacting defense a lot. So they weren't doing any hiring. And I would have been crazy to decline the F-35 offer, which was a really strong offer. So I went to Fort Worth, and they moved me from Michigan to Texas, and it cost a lot of money for the company to do that. And about 4 months into it, I got a call from a number of people that I had networked with in Palmdale before that knew that my ultimate goal was to be at the Skunk Works in design. And they said, hey, Ben, one of those once-in-a-lifetime openings came available, aircraft design, salary grade 1, the straight out of college type job. Do you want it? And I would have been crazy not to accept it. So after 5 months, I worked with my managers in Fort Worth, and I left more than peacefully with them. It wasn't like I'm leaving you tomorrow. They had known what my long-term goals were ahead of time, and by letting them know early, they said, I totally agree. This is the kind of thing that doesn't come around very often. Go for it. So 5 months later, Lockheed moved my wife and I from Texas to California, just after they had moved me from Michigan to Texas. And it's the kind of thing that, I absolutely appreciate from Lockheed, because they were able to give me that kind of support. Maybe other places wouldn't have been able to be that flexible. So if your dream job comes around, if you've been placed for a month, yeah, you might want to think about just cutting the tie. Just do it peacefully. You never want to burn your bridge, especially in the aerospace industry. The 5 of us have probably run into so many different people here that have random connections of some sort. So don't burn any of your bridges.
Yeah, I think one point that can't be emphasized enough there is be upfront about your intentions with your management. Any good manager is going to work to keep you within the company, even if they can't keep you within their group. And they're going to try and allow you to pursue your dreams. But just be very upfront and honest with them about that.
If I could actually add to that real quick. My name is Justice Brewer. I'm the Black Youth Liaison for Policy Committee, acting executive chair of the Black Youth Committee. And I actually just recently went through that in my own organization. I'm at a small space nonprofit. We're only
Justin's really active on the AIAA Young Professional Committee with many of us, so if you have questions, by all means, he's a really great resource to reach out to afterwards too.
I think one of the things that we've kind of all talked about without talking about is you've got to know what it is you want, what interests you, where do your interests lie, and you got to have some brutally honest conversations with yourself about what will make you happy, both technically and socially, and where do you want to live? Some people, they have to live in a certain region. They want to be close to their family. They want to be in a certain area of the country. They want 4 seasons. Some are like, hey, I'm going to take the desert of Palmdale and clear skies and nothing but sun. And some of us are kind of like, well, let's rotate between and try them all out and see what happens.
Sorry, one more thing on that, and then we'll take another question. Telling a group of young people you have to know what you want is a little tricky because a lot of you probably, this is where I was and still kind of am, there's so many options and they all look great. Don't be afraid if you don't know what you want. That's what things like this are for. Talk to people, ask. If your organization is big enough that there's a little flexibility, like APL where I work, the space department's about 600 people, so it's much smaller than Lockheed Martin and Boeing, but it's still big enough that there's a wide variety of projects going on. And you just say, can I work on this? I want to see this. Can I work on that for a little while with a little bit of my extra time, or I'd really be interested in getting involved with this project, and just get your feet wet in it and see if you like it. If you don't, get out of it and go try something else. But you don't have to know right now.
And if that changes, it changes.
And it probably will change. All right, there's a question in the middle there. Yep.
Yes, so the panel's elaborated a lot about the large organization perspective. Maybe, Justin, you can talk about that a little bit more. But what is kind of your opinion with going for smaller organizations, startups, maybe smaller consulting firms in terms of that risk versus opportunity? We talk a lot about how, you have that horizontal mobility with those large organizations that have multiple divisions. But can you speak a little bit more with smaller organizations?
Okay, the question was about smaller organizations and how you can stay on top of mobility, and if a small organization doesn't offer so many horizontal lateral moves, how do you still get this variety of experiences? How does this apply to smaller organizations?
All right, Justin.
Why don't you come up to this microphone?
Justin.
Yeah, you can stay.
Yeah, I've actually had fairly broad experiences. I started in undergrad as an intern at Johnson Space Center. My first job out of school was actually working as an analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency. So to start with, I did get that experience in a large organization. And one of the most important things that I did while I was there, in both at NASA and at the CIA, was that I wasn't afraid to take rotational opportunities in areas other than my area of expertise. And when I was in those other teams or other divisions, I still worked my ass off when I was there because I was representing my home organization and I was building up my personal reputation. And I wanted, when I went back to my home office, to my home team, for the people that I left to be able to tell my management, like I did a year-long rotation in the CIA Operations Center. And when I left, they tried to hire me away from engineering analysis because, no, I didn't have to have an engineering degree to work in the Operations Center. But I showed up at my job, I did what I was supposed to do, and I did it with an implicit understanding of the importance of the work that I was doing. And regardless of what your degree is, if you can show that to people, they respond to that and appreciate that. And so I used those opportunities at the beginning of my career working in a large organization to make a good reputation for myself regardless of what technical projects I worked on. And so having gone through that experience and then going to grad school and then coming back to the NASA community, I worked as a NASA contractor for a while on both Constellation and ISS. And then when this opportunity to go to CASIS came up, I decided that I was at that point in my career where I really wanted to jump on it because, when you're working as a contractor or as a civil servant, there are certain large organizational culture issues that can be very difficult to deal with at the individual level. One of my mentors at JSC said that in his experience, if you stay at a large organization, you get to about 7 years and you decide, okay, I have to go do something else, or this place is going to make me crazy, or you meld into your local culture and you just learn to live with it. And I had essentially gotten to the point after a couple of years working Constellation, a couple of years working ISS, that I was ready to do something different. And so I interviewed at places like Paragon Space Development Corporation, which is another small to medium size, very agile-oriented company. I interviewed at SpaceX, and then Casis came along and ended up giving me the opportunity to come work for them. Even now, after about 2.5 years of operation, we're only about 35 people across the country. So we are a very small organization. We like to say we're one big, happy, dysfunctional family. But that's true to a certain extent, because when you're in that startup mode, you have all hands on deck, you have a very clear mission, and everybody's working towards it. And I feel like I respond well to that environment. And because of that, I've been able to move up within the ranks of my organization fairly quickly and become someone that senior management goes to because they know they can rely on me. And I was able, and you can get those kind of experiences very quickly in a small organization. But there is also a certain level of risk associated with that. There was a point working at Casis about a year ago where, just because of politics, both here on the Hill and within NASA, and in the founding of our organization, NASA almost pulled the plug on the whole thing and started over again. And my daughter had just been born. My wife was on maternity leave, so she was at reduced salary. So I really felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, because I not only had to fulfill my obligations at work and to accomplish our mission, but I also had to be sure that I was taking care of my family. And so, you know, I put in the long hours. I responded to action items at 8 o'clock in the evening on Saturday, because that was what I needed to do to help my organization be successful and make sure that my family's taken care of. And we got through all of that. We're a thriving organization now, and we just flew our first payloads to station on the last Cygnus flight, and I think things are looking up from here. So you've got to decide what level of risk you're willing to accept within an organization, what kind of organizational culture you're looking for, because some people, they want the stability, the continuity, the development. Like Boeing and Lockheed both have absolutely fantastic systems engineering development programs for their employees. Whereas me working at Casis, my career development is on the job and convincing my bosses to let me come to stuff like this. So you've got to decide what balance works for you.
All right, thank you very much for an ad hoc panelist over here. We have a question back there. Yep.
Yeah, can you comment on the kind of doors that open and maybe close as you get additional degrees during your career? I guess that question might be more for Gregory, but maybe you guys have your own opinion on that.
So the question is, what doors open and close as you get various different degrees and more advanced degrees? Greg?
First job I applied for after I finished my PhD was to be a bartender. I didn't get the job because they didn't like the idea that I had a PhD. So there was a door that was closed, and actually that's a very serious situation. I waited 6 months before my opportunity at the NRL opened up. I'd gone through the process for, I think it was 10 months from the time that I was invited to the interview, from the time that I started. I knew the job was coming, I knew the paperwork was going through, there were all sorts of administrative processes that had to be done, but I'd also finished my degree, and I was, you know, back living with mom and dad without a job. Didn't work so well. So there are some doors that close. But I would also argue that if I didn't really enjoy finally having a little bit of downtime in that 6-month period, probably could have found a different bartending job or working part-time for any other space organization or what have you. The problem you have as you get more advanced degrees is you start becoming a specialist in your area. So I went off to get my PhD because I thought, one, it would look good on my astronaut application, and two, I thought robots were cool. And didn't really realize at the time how complicated various areas of robotics were. The first 2 directions that I went through in my research were dead ends. Took me literally 4 days after the last extension I was allowed to make at my university before I submitted my thesis. So the process was about as drawn out as it could have been. But I ended up becoming that specialist in an area that at first I didn't know much about. Now I'm pretty excited about it. But I also recognize that I don't really have an opportunity to go back to some of the other jobs I used to have. I mean, being an intern in an aerospace software company, not really the skill set. I don't really have the skill set anymore that had. Working in the Mission Control Center, unless I'm specifically working in the robotics control position, then I don't really qualify anymore. Whereas a general aerospace engineer trying to figure out what you want to do, the opportunities of where you can go and where you can take your current degree level are pretty broad. So I would argue advanced degrees are definitely worth going for, but make sure you know what you want. Make sure you've decided what your passion is before you go down that road. Because if after 6 years of doing my PhD, I realized that the last thing I ever wanted to see again was a robot, I'd be a little screwed.
I'm kind of, I mean, obviously there's a difference between PhD and master's, but mine is, I've kind of slightly specialized myself into fluid dynamics and propulsion, and, I have that chemical engineering background. I don't have that bachelor's in aerospace that I can say, well, I have all the other general knowledge about aerospace too. I am kind of set slightly on that one, I've had people been like, oh, you should, come interview for our structures department. I'm like, yeah, I've never taken a statics class in my life. That's not going to go well. So you kind of get, even with your master's degree, slightly specialized, especially if you're changing degrees around, getting one from mechanical or systems or electrical. The next degree you have, no matter what, is going to slightly specialize you some, which is going to close some doors. But having that advanced degree is going to open some more at the same time.
Yeah, I think, if your undergrad and grad are the same, PhD aside, Greg has a real good background for PhD. The rest of us just up through masters, but sort of, almost. But if those two are the same, you're a little bit specialized, but you're still mostly open. If you change it up, if you do aero undergrad, double E or CS or mechanical, whatever, mechanical and aero are pretty similar. But if you do something else otherwise, you can be a little bit more broad technically, but still, have a technical level of credentials. If you do something like systems engineering, systems architecting and engineering like I'm doing, that's a little bit more broad. It's not so technical. It focuses on a couple other things in integration. So that maybe opens up a few more around the way. But again, if you want to be a specialized person, systems architecting wouldn't be or systems engineering wouldn't be a very good master's program for you. Because if you want to do design or analysis or something like that in a specific area, you want a master's in aero structures or fluids and something like that, or a PhD in it. That's the way you get ahead in that. But if you want something else, then maybe look a little bit more broad. And as far as how the company views those different degrees, if you're at one of the big corporations, one of the big public companies, if you undergrad's like the baseline, and then if you get a master's, there's a few things that open up. The master's, and I know this sucks because you spend a lot of time and money and energy and your life on a master's, and then it's kind of a checkbox. It doesn't really matter where you go. There's definitely dependencies on that. But for the most part, it's sort of, all right, you got a master's, you're now qualified to get a promotion a little bit earlier than everyone else. That's mostly what it is.
I was going to make it. It does get you a year or two.
A little bit early, yep.
A couple years advantage.
And we should
credit.
say it gives you the opportunity to apply for a promotion. You don't get a master's and then all of a sudden you get a 10% raise and you're promoted to the next level. You get your master's and you come in the next day and it's exactly the same. And maybe soon you can, go for a promotion, or you have some lateral move that becomes available because maybe you broaden yourself up or are a little bit more technically an expert.
Well, I mean, some of the not quite fresh out of college jobs, you might be able to start with a master's degree, whereas
Yes.
you might need 2 or 3 years experience with just an undergrad.
That's right.
So
Usually
there
the
are some more
master's
doors
is like
open.
2 years of experience is what it counts as. So if you have a master's out of school, you can hire into what we call a salary grade 2 position, where normally if you just have your undergrad, you got to work for 2 years before you go do that. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Justin.
Well, and there's one other wrinkle to all of that. If you go for a non-technical or an interdisciplinary master's, that changes the calculus as well. So if you get like your MBA, or I know a guy that did engineering in undergrad, but then went and did planetary science for his master's because he wanted to go build sensors to go put on Mars rovers, that sort of thing. Or I knew a guy that did engineering in undergrad, but then went and got a master's in public health because he wanted to do flight health management. So it depends to some degree on what you want to do and how broad you want your base to be. So for example, if you really do see yourself going into a management type role or activity, they do kind of look for you if you've got that technical base to expand your horizons and look at some sort of like business degree or technical project management masters or something like that. And so I have the 2 technical degrees, but then I'm also working on a second master's right now in an interdisciplinary program where I've taken classes on both space physiology and space habitat design, but I also got an associate's in technical project management as part of that program. So you've got to think about what path you want to take. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was when I was doing my technical research master's at Rice. One of my committee members said, do not go for the PhD unless you are 110% committed, because if you're not happy enough without it, you will never be happy enough with it.
And I can kind of agree with what Justin said. Even just having an interdisciplinary technical field, it, like I said, it kind of closes the doors of I haven't taken statics, and that closes some, but I can automatically now, there's specific positions that are saying, we want an interdisciplinary engineer. We want someone who's been in different fields and knows how to work in them, between them, and fill the hole we have. So it opens things up as well.
Purely from the perspective of doors opening and closing, with each new university you go to, you get an incredible new network through the Alumni Association. And that is your instantaneous, every person's starting network, which it can be very valuable. Things like AIAA are also extremely valuable, but your Alumni Association has a lot of value too. And if you go to a different place for master's or PhD, you get a whole new set of alumni to connect with. There are also other programs like International Space University, which gives you global connections. I mean, there are a lot of different programs out there that don't undervalue the network you get through even just certificate programs and things like that. So let's take another question. We're a little short on time, so probably only time for about 2 more questions. Any other questions out there? All right, well, I'll go ahead and then we'll do the parting comments, and then people can mingle a little bit, and then I think there's about a half an hour break before the next session starts. So the final question for each panelist is just what's one piece of advice that you want to leave people with today? So your short, concise message, your parting shot. Ben, you can start.
I was just going to say, I'm not going to go first. Okay. No, I'll wing it. You want to have a strategy. There are so many people that in their plans for career development or in pursuing their long-term goals just have no idea how they're going to get there. They haven't really thought about it, or if they have, it's not really refined and it doesn't necessarily make sense. It's not realistic, whatever it is. You want to have a strategy. So you want to develop some way of how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to be down the road. When you look at your career, career development plans can range a lot of different ways. Generally speaking, a good way to look at it is to look 20 years out. That's kind of crazy because especially for the students, that's as long as you've been alive, and now you're trying to plan that far out into the future. But if you can have a general idea of what you want to do, or really specific is even better, the more specific the better, of what you want to do in 20 years, about middle of the way through your career, then start working backwards. All right, to make that 20-year goal, where do I need to be in about 10 years to eventually build the skills and be able to be promoted into that 20-year goal? Where do I need to be in 5 years in order to make my 10-year goal? And then eventually you get to where do I need to be next year, and what kind of skills do I need to be developing right now in order to make my 1-year goal, my 3 to 5, my 10, my 20. If you want to go all the way out, you know, what kind of job you want to be doing when you retire and step back from there. And you should constantly be updating it. It's not something that this plan exists and that's all you have. Every time you get a new job, every time you talk to someone and they maybe influence your opinion a little bit, go and tweak your plan. Don't keep it in your head. Write the thing down. Put it on your computer, whatever you want to do. Get it some way where you can see it, and when you go back and look at it, you can actually have some tangible way of doing it. If you keep it in your head, you're going to forget about it. You're not going to care about it. But if you write the thing down and you make a point to go over it a lot of times, that's tremendously helpful. The other thing to think about, bring that plan to your mentors and ask them, is this realistic? I want to be in VP in 5 years and I just graduated. Guess what? That's not realistic. And your mentors will tell you that. And that's the kind of thing that you want. If you bring that kind of plan to your mentors, especially if you have any much more senior people that are your mentors, they're going to be so impressed by the fact that you've actually thought about the plan that you want to do. And it will change. And the plan that you have isn't going to be the way it is. I started the panel off by saying that reality is a lot different than, you know, the way you plan, and that chief engineers and VPs, they don't follow the normal path that they would expect. So just update it all the time. So have a strategy. I think that's what I'll leave you with.
All right, Greg?
I guess my parting advice is to make sure, is to make sure you think about how to capitalize on every opportunity that crosses your path. You never know when, I've kind of listed a couple of things off, you never know when driving a robot around at one conference is going to lead to a life-changing shift in a foreign country. You never know when having a sketchy job interview, as I'd mentioned earlier, or an opportunity for a job interview, turns out to be the next Google venture. You never know when a random conversation over a beer might lead to that startup that you and your friends were talking about. Everybody you meet at this conference, in this room, at any other job setting, professional setting, even personal setting that you're in, is an opportunity for you to have a massive influence in your own world. You never know where it's going to lead.
I forgot to mention in the bios, Greg has his own startup robotics company, so he's a very interesting person to talk to if you have any questions about that either. All right, Cheryl.
All right. Just kind of, you know, it seems really obvious, but whatever you end up doing, even if right then and there it's not what you want to do, work hard in it. Work hard in everything you're going to do. Eventually, the impressions you make just by working hard, or the experiences you've had, good or bad, and the knowledge that you're going to gain no matter what, are going to pay off. It's going to come back in the end, and you're going to be like, you know, if you'd gotten that bartending job, you know, I'm going to like, well, I'm not working my technical field, but you learn personal skills. Like, eventually, it's all going to come back. So just work hard in whatever you're doing right then, and then, you know, use your plan that Ben was just talking about to get where you want to go. But you have to be where you are right now and do what you can while you're there.
Thank you for setting me up, because you just gave me another one. My list is getting longer. So kind of building off that, one thing to really realize in whatever company or organization, the reputation you make will go out far further than you realize, and people will know about you, and make sure that that's a good one. Assuming you've gotten a job, one piece of advice would be to maximize your 401k right off the bat. At the very least, take advantage of your company's matching. If you don't, you're kind of giving away free money. The earlier you start that, the better and easier situated you'll be at the end. Other one, no one is responsible for your career but you. Managers can help, but you are the one who has to decide and know where you want to go and what you want to do and what interests you. I said earlier, know what you want, and kind of what I mean by that is know what you like, know what interests you, know where you think you want to go. It doesn't have to be a hard, I want to be an airplane designer. The very first job I had was one I had no idea existed and was incredibly challenging, incredibly stressful, but ultimately one of the things I learned absolutely the most from and opened so many doors for me. Take chances, learn about different areas. Don't just focus on your one area unless that's what you want to do. If learning one particular area is what you want to do, go wholeheartedly into that. Always be learning. Don't ever stop. That's when you stagnate. That's when doors start closing. One thing I've found very valuable is to have a bunch of different mentors / sounding boards. And what I mean by that is they're not just associated with one site or company, because sometimes you'll talk to a bunch of mentors who are, say, in your organization, and they'll tell you something, this is just the way it is, it's okay, and you go talk to someone at a different site, and they're like, no, that is 100% opposite of what we're supposed to do, and that is very valuable to know. The other thing is keep your resume up to date, regularly refresh it. It gets harder the more you put it off.
Okay, so let's thank our panelists and thank everybody for coming. So it's really great to see so many young people at these conferences. We really do value your feedback. If you want to see more of things like this or less, or you think a different style would be helpful, please, please, please let us know. We really do take that feedback back and they get wrapped into future events. And then the challenge I leave you with is meet one new person before you walk out that door. Everyone's going to be doing it, so there's no embarrassment. Just meet one person, ask why they're here. Thank you, everybody.